welcome back to the Rules of Engagement. Before we jump into our third segment, I remind you guys, if you're interested in a game design career or an esports production career, go ahead and check out your career or your educational opportunities, at Full Sail University. Go to www.fullsail.edu/MLG to find out more information on our programs in game design, video production, audio engineering, 3D animation, all these cool different potential careers later down the road. Again, go to www.fullsail.edu/MLG for more information about Full Sail University's game design and esports production programs. Our third segment is going to be between Goswser and Macsed. It's going to be talking about a Void Ray Colossi PvZ style from both sides of the coin. So first we're going to talk about how to make use of early units. If you end up with a bunch of units early, what should you do with them? Also how to play Zerg vs Protoss on an equal economy, and then the dynamics of a Roach Hydra Viper composition versus a Colossi Void Ray based composition. So we're starting this replay off at a 6-minute mark. And the first thing we're going to look at is the openings. So Macsed is opening basically a 4-gate opening. Goswser is realized his opponent didn't take gases early at the expansion, and so he's gained a Roach Warren fairly early on. Now what's important here is as a Zerg player, you have to recognize when you need units and when the threat of a Protoss could potentially hit you. And it's very difficult. This is one of the hardest parts about playing Zerg is trying to figure out how much your opponent is committing to an attack. So Macsed, what he's going to do is he's going to warp in a series of some early units. He's going to start to move out across the map to put on pressure, right? He has Sentries, Mothership Core. Always with these early pressure builds, if it's units that you can't afford to lose, i.e. Sentries, bring the Mothership Core with the Sentries so you can use recall if you get into trouble. On the other hand, Goswser is already getting 4 Roaches and 8 Zerglings. He's cutting drones at 38, which is exceptionally early. There's almost never a situation where you actually need to cut drones that early. Only for one has the proxy pylon up, which ideally as a Zerg player, you don't let that proxy pylon get up early on in the game. But what he's doing is being very safe. He's reading, okay, my opponent's doing it might be a mass gateway attack. I don't see the gases yet. Now he sees the gas being taken. And there is 4 gates of pressure. So Macsed is trying to make use of his early units to prevent Goswser from being too greedy. If Goswser was too greedy, this small attack could potentially deny a third base. But really behind us, he hasn't cut any probe production. You can see now he's already ahead of the Zerg economy, and he's going to get more ahead as more and more probes are produced, and he's going to double Stargate behind us. So this is really kind of a feint attack. Setting Hallucinated Phoenix out, he's going to scout. He sees Goswser has all these units already done before the third's even done. He's like, okay, let's back away. This attack has already worked. Look at how many units he's made, right? If you look at income, I mean, the Zerg's behind in income, and the Zerg's not doing a tech build, right? His Alera's just started, and Protoss has 2 Stargates already done. So a situation where Goswser made a lot of units early. He's a little bit behind than he'd like to be because these units were totally unnecessary. But that's okay. Sometimes that happens as a Zerg player. You get tricked. You think your opponent's going to gateway all in. They're really not. It's kind of information that's very hard to get. You can end up in a situation. If you do end up in a situation, right? If you end up with basically an early force but a weaker economy, you cut that economy to get this early force. It's very important that we use this force to make sure your opponent doesn't get a good economy either. You want to make sure they cannot take a third base very fast. With all these units, step 1, make sure there's no proxy pylons around, right? Patrol with speedings. They shouldn't be... this army gives Goswser total map control, but he's not taking advantage of it. So if you have the early units, try to make the most of them, right? At the very least, have some speedings at the third base to keep track of your opponent's third base timing. Or you have the Overlord here, if you can keep track of that third base timing. If he tries to take it before like the 11-minute mark, you should go ahead and just kill it with these units you have out. So that's one thing here. We can see that the Protoss is taking a Nexus, and there's no way this Nexus could be defended from this force. The Void Rays could kill a couple Roaches, but with just, 4 Zealots and 4 Sentries against, bring up View tab, 9 Roaches and 25 Speedings. If he is attacking this base, if his units are out in the field, and he's attacking this base as it's being started before the cannons get up, there's no way that Macsed can actually take this third base. Of course, it doesn't mean it's a mistake for Macsed to try to take it. If Goswser was waiting to cancel it, he just canceled the Nexus, his Voiders would get a couple kills, he'd still be fine. But that doesn't mean that Goswser shouldn't try to cancel it. He should still cancel it because it'll slow down the Protoss economy, and then it'll be a relatively even game. When he lets the Protoss take this third base this fast, when he's invested in this many early units, now all of a sudden Goswser is going to be playing from behind. So this is where Zerg never wants to be at. As we go through this game, we'll fast forward just a little bit. We're in a situation where if you look at things, he's basically been playing from a roughly even economy. Right now he's ahead by six workers, Well, it's a Protoss has a third base up. He's going to constantly make probes. Well, ideally he's going to make a few more. He's slightly behind economy, but it's roughly even, right? 3 base to 3 base. You know, pretty much even saturation at all the bases. It's going to be a very, very even economy. Right now, Goswser has a little bit more gas income. That'll change. And he's in a situation where, okay, I'm playing Zerg vs Protoss on a relatively even economy. We're both very close, within, you know, 10-20% of each other's income. And I'm stuck on Roach Hydra, right? If you look at his composition, he's already went Roach Hydra. And this is a very rough situation to be in as a Zerg. If you're an equal economy to a Protoss, ideally you want to have those high-tech units. Unless Protoss is massing Zealots and Stalkers, but almost no Protoss does that, right? In this case, he's going for a Void Rays and Colossi, very high-tech, very cost-efficient competition in the late game. The Zerg player is going to be on either need to have an overwhelming economic advantage, or you ideally have those high-tech units. You have Infestors, you have Swarm Hosts, you have you know, units that can be very cost-efficient. If you're already stuck on Roach Hydra, right? Ideally, you wouldn't have the Roach Hydras. Ideally, you'd have Swarm Hosts instead, and then maybe some Hydras or some Queens or some Spore Crawlers to help with the Void Rays. But if you're stuck on Roach Hydra, the next best thing to having a high-tech army is to add in Vipers. So we see in production, he went straight for the Hive. Even from 2 minutes ago, he realized the situation he was in, knew he needed to be cost-efficient, knew he was locked into Roach Hydra, so he couldn't build a mass Swarm Host army, didn't have the resources. But what he can do is he can go ahead and get the Vipers. Now, the important thing here is to recognize, okay, I know I need Vipers to make this composition work. It just has to have Vipers. But if we rewind this just a second, he's only on 3 bases, 6 gas right now, so he doesn't have a ton of gas. If at this point in the game, he spends no gas on nothing besides Vipers, he'd get up 4 to 5 Vipers. And against an army like this, where you're going to have, you know, 3, 4 Colossi, a ton of Void Rays, you're going to want 4 Vipers, if not 5. And so if you're in a situation where you're like, okay, I need to spend every inch of gas I have on the Vipers, that means I can't build Roaches or Hydras anymore, right? I built these 6 Hydras, I already have some Roaches and Hydras, this is it. Can't build more. So in a situation where if I do that, if I don't build these 8 Roaches, these 8 Roaches are the same gas as 1 Viper, but what do I spend my minerals on, right? It's so easy to say, okay, I only have gas for Roach Hydra, I can't afford many Vipers. But with that situation, you're not going to win engagements if you don't have many Vipers. So ideally, instead of getting all the extra Roaches, you spend your minerals on a lot of extra Queens and a lot of extra Spore Crawlers, right? Spore Crawlers are your best friend against Colossi Void Ray competition. Spore Crawlers are amazing against Void Rays, and they're actually pretty darn good against Colossi too, as long as you have the Vipers to supplement them. The reason why Spore Crawlers are often better than Spines is, one, Spore Crawlers only hit the high-tech Protoss units. They only hit the important ones. A Spine Crawler will be attacking Zealots or Stalkers. A Spore Crawler will only be attacking Void Rays or Colossi. Also, Spore Crawler has 100 more life than a Spine Crawler. It's much harder to kill, it's also cheaper, and it does more damage per second. So it's just better at everything if your opponent has a lot of air units. Counting Colossi as air units, if their bulk of their army is air, you can deal with the ground with the Roach Hydra Force. You want to get Spore Crawlers as opposed to the Spine Crawlers to back up your army. Now, of course, in the bases, you still want some Spines to defend Harass. But as far as your mid-game, your midfield army to deploy, you want to spread creep out, get Queens to get Spore Crawlers. That way you save gas. You use that gas to get extra Vipers. Now going forward, of course, we're going to see the engagement. And the one tricky situation as both players are engaging that we notice is, one, Goswser has a lot of extra money in the bank. That's not because he's been light years ahead in economy. It's because if we take a look at the army values, the Protoss has 2,000 more resources in army value, because he has more costly units, right? He has all these Void Rays, all these Colossi. Army just has more valuable units in it. So it's a situation where the Zerg doesn't have to win the battle. They just have to trade reasonably well, and they'll be okay. Now, in these engagements, the most important thing is to say, okay, I need to get rid of my opponent's damage output as fast as possible. That's always your priority in the battle. His biggest damage output is the Colossi. So ideally, the positioning is fine. All his units can engage. He wants to abduct the Colossi to get rid of damage. But the scary thing is so many Zergs are used to find an army that has Templar in it, right? And if your opponent has Templar, in fact, there are 2 in the back here, generally what a Zerg does is they yank the most expensive units that they can without getting fed back. So in this situation, Goswser just says, okay, there's some Void Rays here. I got to yank those before I get feedback, right? Because if I don't use my yanks now, he'll get the feedbacks off. And the thing is, yanking Void Rays is cool, but Void Rays only have range 6, And you can usually take them down with Hydras anyway if the Colossi are dead. If the Colossi aren't dead, even if you yank the Void Rays, you're going to die before you can kill too many of the Void Rays anyway. So that actually wasn't that bad engagement for Goswser, but it would have been nicer if he could have gone to Colossi. Of course, it's very difficult with Templar in the mix. Now, one thing important to notice is it looks like Macsed crushed that battle. But if you take a look at this, look at units lost. Zerg is down by 1,500 units lost. If we want to right before that battle. There we go. We're on to right before that battle. Zerg is down right before the engagement happens. You see he's down by 200. So he only lost 1,300 resources, more than Protoss in that engagement. So it actually wasn't as bad an engagement as you think. It's just the Protoss army had a much more units invested into it before the battle, so of course he's going to come out on top. And this is again where the Zerg player, the goal right now for Goswser is, yes, I lost engagement, but one, I'm already remaxed, right? But I need to get the Vipers back with energy. Because remember, Roaches, Hydras on their own are not going to deal with Colossi Void Ray very well. From a Protoss point of view, he's thinking, I did well that battle, but I've been on 3 bases for a long time. My opponent now has a 4th base up. As my main runs out, unless I want to retreat, sit on a 4th, and play a longer game, I have to get damage done before he can re-rally and regroup his forces. So he's going for this engagement, and right here, Goswser goes out to meet him again when he's maxed. And the one situation here, as a Protoss opponent, remember, it's all about Colossi. The way these battles work, it's all about the Colossi. So the one way Zerg can get rid of them is by abducting them. The other way is in his composition. Remember the last battle, he had like 1 billion Zealots. He only has 4 Zealots left. Right? He lost so many of them in that earlier engagement. He has a few more coming in, but his melee army is very weak. So what that means is in the battle, what he has to think about is all of a sudden he has to think about, okay, I don't have the Zealots to tank. I can't afford to lose his Colossi. He has units coming in from every direction. What can I do to stop these guys? So first step, buy himself time. Time warps will buy him time. The second step, it's all about the force fields, right? So as a Protoss player, you look where your opponent's army is. You say, okay, these Roaches, right, how big of a threat are they? This isn't enough Roaches to take out a Colossi before they all die. But they still do some damage, so if you want to buy some time, you could put one force field like right here. But the main threat is going to be all the units coming in from this angle. The time warps will buy you time on the bottom, but your first force fields, you really want to make sure these units can't come in and flank those important Colossi because your Zealots are tied up dealing with the time warp units. And then later you have to do the other force fields back here as well. So that's the first step, is to recognize where you need to do force fields, where the Zerg can threaten you. The second step is to time the force fields well. You don't want to instantly put down a line of force fields. Zergless back away. If Zerg backs away and you don't trap any units, you don't really kill many. Maybe you kill 4 or 5 Roaches, not a big deal. What you want to do is you want to try to hit this line of force fields after about 1/3 of the Zerg army crosses it. That way you can kill 1/3 of the Zerg army, but our 2/3 is stuck, maybe shooting Zealots, maybe not shooting at all, and you're at a great engagement. The Zerg, the way to deal with this is if you have Vipers, and you can deal with this okay. But without Vipers, if Protoss hits the force fields perfectly, you'll see why as a Zerg player, you don't want to be stuck with Roach Hydra in the late game against this composition. So we're going to get back in the game, we're going to see that. Ideally, these Vipers, if these were into engagement, and he could have abducted 2 Colossi, we might see a totally different battle here, right? Because having 2 Colossi and 4 is huge. But as is, right, you see how the force fields go down, right? He cuts, look at this. He cuts off exactly, oh, not exactly, but about 8 units, which is basically 1/3. He didn't quite cut all these units off, and that was a little bit of a mistake. This force field was a tiny bit too low. Notice Roaches on the flank. Like I said, they weren't going to do a big deal. There weren't enough to focus down a Colossi before all the damage would kill them, so you didn't have to worry about them. The real threat was his flank here. Missed a tiny bit of a force field. That's going to cost him a Sentry. It's going to cost him a Colossus as well. But it's still a good engagement. The main key thing is all these units were stuck outside the force fields, and he only lost a single Colossus, and now he's going to take this battle convincingly. And after he wins this engagement, of course, now there's the Vipers ran in there and died. There's not enough units from Zerg, and the game's pretty much over, right? He can't afford to remax again. He doesn't have any larva left. He has plenty of minerals, but not enough gas, not enough larva. And as Protoss moves in, the Zerg units will be incrementing in one at a time. And when the Zerg units increment in like this, a few units from each side, they just can't close the distance, and they're going to get picked off before they can do too much. So there's the game. Goswser's going to GG in a few seconds here. But a couple key things to think about from both sides of this battle. One, Goswser fell behind early in the game because Macsed at his first few units, he used them to make sure Goswser wasn't being too greedy. Goswser overreacted, made a lot of units, and it actually could have been okay if he used those units to make sure that the Protoss couldn't be greedy. But instead, he let the Protoss take a third base that was undefendable. He could have delayed the third base by about 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, and he still would have been behind, but not by too much. But you gotta make use of those early units because he didn't do that, he fell behind. Then he was in a situation where he's on the equal economy versus the Protoss. If you're in that situation as Zerg, you're on Roach Hydra, you have to abduct the Colossi. Vipers, the only way you can make the Roach Hydra work is if you get rid of those Colossi as soon as possible. Corruptors are very bad if your opponent has a lot of Void Rays, so you want to avoid Corruptors. You're going to go straight for those Vipers, which he did. You've got to abduct the Colossi. Sometimes with Templar it's very difficult, but it's the only way you're going to win, so you might as well try to go for it and hope you can get those key abducts off. And also remember, as a Protoss player, when you're using Force Fields, try to cut 1/3 of the Zerg army off. 1/3 is usually the amount you can kill with minimal losses. Any more, you might lose some units. Any less, and the Zerg can back away, and your Force Fields aren't quite as efficient as you'd like them to be. So wraps up our third segment. We'll take a short break and be right on to the Q&A.